Welcome to the Online Graduate Research Forum for Fall 2017. My name is Ezequiel Hurbines, and I'm your presenter. I'm a graduate student in the Master's of Science in Interdisciplinary Studies in the Department of Occupational, Workforce, and Leadership Studies. The title of my research study is Exploring Law Enforcement Officers' Perceptions about Potential Effects of Marijuana Legalization for Recreational Use in Texas. I was delighted to conduct this research study to further explore law enforcement officers' perceptions over the effects of legalizing marijuana in the state of Texas after reading an academic journal which explored detainees and staff's perspectives over the use of cannabis in the male prison. It was then when everything clicked and prompted me to conduct a research study over law enforcement officers' perceptions about the effects of legalizing marijuana for recreational use in Texas. Some problem key points include: number 1, lack of law enforcement officers' perceptions over the effects of legalizing marijuana. Number 2, past studies have not made it known whether law enforcement officers support legalizing marijuana. The importance of this research study is that findings will help determine whether legalizing marijuana will create more positive than negative effects, and if it's worth the risk based upon law enforcement officers' perceptions. The purpose of this study was to explore law enforcement officers' perceptions about the potential effects legalizing marijuana for recreational use could create in the state of Texas. The following 3 research questions guided this study. Number 1. In what ways do law enforcement officers perceive the negative effects of legalizing marijuana for recreational use in the state of Texas? Number 2. In what ways do law enforcement officers perceive the positive effects of legalizing marijuana for recreational use in the state of Texas? And number 3. Do law enforcement officers in Texas support the legalization of marijuana for recreational use? As part of our research study, we were told to look at several peer-reviewed articles. One of the articles I found interesting was the article of cannabis used in a Swiss male prison, which took a qualitative approach on exploring detainees and staff's perspectives. This research study consisted of the perceived negative effects and positive effects from detainees and prison staff. This article gave me the idea to explore law enforcement officers' perceptions. The other article consisted of a poll, which was conducted in Texas, where it was discovered that 83% supported medical marijuana, 53% supported broader legislation, and only 17% supported the status quo in Texas. For the research design, I implemented an exploratory research design approach. Only 4 law enforcement officers participated in this study. All law enforcement officers were males. Participant number 1, Jake, was in his late 60s. Participant number 2, Scott, was in his late 40s. Participant number 3, Luke, was in his late 30s, and Samuel was in his early 30s. Data collection was gathered by 3 face-to-face semi-structured interviews and 1 phone interview. Interviews consisted of both closed and open-ended questions. Purposive sample was implemented to attain qualified participants. Data analysis consisted of thematic analysis. According to Brown and Clark, thematic analysis is a method where researchers identify, analyze, and report patterns, also known as themes, within the transcribed information of participants' interviews. Thematic analysis, overall, is a 6-step process in which researchers must incorporate to ensure that successful use of this method. In summary, more negative effects are more likely to occur if recreational marijuana was to be legalized. Throughout the interviews, many participants identified crime increase as being a negative effect from the legalization of marijuana for recreational use. Three of the participants talked about how they could see crime increasing due to the legalization of marijuana and how it could play several roles in people and society as a whole. Overall, the three perceived negative effects were crime increase, new responsibilities, and marijuana as the new entry-level drug. Positive effects were also expected in legalizing marijuana for recreational use. As participants' transcribed interviews were being analyzed using thematic analysis, the researcher found two emergent themes. The two themes revolve around the second question of the study. The participants expressed their perceptions regarding the positive effects legalizing marijuana for recreational use could cause, and those two were decreasing arrests and tax revenues. Overall, 75% of law enforcement officers said yes to recreational marijuana legalization in Texas. 3 out of the 4 law enforcement officers supported legislation. In summary of this study, I interviewed 4 law enforcement officers over their perceptions about the potential effects of legalizing marijuana for recreational use in the state of Texas. I discovered, based upon law enforcement perceptions, that more negative effects would occur than positive effects, and overall, it was determined that 3 out of the 4 law enforcement officers supported legalizing marijuana for recreational use in Texas. Implications to practice. Further research should be conducted on law enforcement officers to explore similar topics of subjects. Doing so will help amend the gap where the lack of law enforcement officers' perceptions exist. Conclusions. After analyzing and concluding this research study, it was determined, based off law enforcement officers' perceptions, that about 75% of law enforcement officers support legalizing marijuana for recreational use, which in return could imply that marijuana is not as bad as it seems compared to other drugs, such as alcohol or even tobacco. Marijuana could also bring several positive effects, despite the negative effects, like tax revenue and a decrease of arrests. Recommendations for future studies. Many improvements can be done in the future to foster more accurate results. For example, rather than taking a qualitative route, researchers could take a quantitative approach by conducting online surveys or questionnaires on the potential effects of legalizing marijuana for recreational use. By conducting a quantitative study, researchers can expect to get more accurate percentages from a bigger population sample and get an estimated number about how many law enforcement officers in the state of Texas support legalizing marijuana for recreational use. You may rate my presentation or provide comments and/or questions. Thank you.